I'm sure that this was by plan, but there were some things that he said. I want you to remember what he was saying about similarity in the Schuylkill Valley as people were moving in around 500 to 600, and then an interesting transition with low levels of migration through the Basket Maker 3 period, or the Basket Maker 2 period, and then an interesting migration transition between Basket Maker 3 and P1. It's also interesting because Kai was using the Pecos Classification System, which, as most of y'all know, was introduced and developed here at the Pecos Conference, the first Pecos Conference in 1927. It got published in Science in a really boring named article, a Southwestern Archaeology Conference. I mean, I've tried to get published in Science, and they like flashy titles, so I don't know how they did it. What's interesting about the Pecos Classification System is, it was developed based on architectural and ceramic typologies. They were just developing tree ring dating, and so they hadn't really gotten there yet. But once tree ring dating came in, they found out that this system, Basket Maker 2, Basket Maker 3, Pueblo 1, Pueblo 2, Pueblo 3, Pueblo 4, Contact, that this system has really stood the test of time. Bill Light talked about it in the late 70s. He said, the Pecos Classification System is really magnificent. Tree ring dating has shown that it stands the test of time, and it's very well understood. Well, in his 1982 dissertation, Mike Berry questioned that assertion by Bill Light. What Mike Berry did is he pulled together a very large database, unprecedented at the time, of tree ring dates. He had about 15,000 tree ring dates. About half of them were cutting or near cutting dates, so he was pretty sure of them. And what his pattern showed was, instead of a smooth cultural transition going through time, 4 bumps, 4 peaks that he noticed lined up perfectly with the 4 primary Pueblo Pecos classification periods, the Basket Maker 3 period, and then Pueblo 1, Pueblo 2, Pueblo 3. What I want to talk to you about today are 2 large data sets that my colleagues and I have been developing that I think tell us a little bit more about, can explain a little bit better that Pecos classification system. Why we can walk up to almost any archaeological site on this landscape and within a 150-year period nail when somebody built it. That's outrageous. That's outrageous and unprecedented elsewhere globally. The first is an extension of Mike Berry's pioneering work. Over the last 20 years, first Mike Berry and Larry Benson, and now Tim Kohler and myself, have been expanding that initial tree ring date data set. We now have 32,700 dates, tree ring dates from across the U.S. Southwest, and about 15,500 cutting dates. And what we found is, when you do a histogram of these, when you bin them by period, or you do a probability density distribution, you get the same sort of thing. Now, anybody who's seen me give a talk knows that I can't speak without graphics. So instead, we're going to do imaginary graphics today, okay? All right, and over here, this is about AD 1500, all right? This is AD 500. We're moving through time, all right? We've got a small bump in BM3, a bigger one in P1, a bigger one in P2, and going on to P3, and then it drops off. The Pajarito Plateau doesn't yield good trees for tree ring dating, so it drops off right before what we would call the Pueblo 4, or the Classic period in the northern Rio Grande. So this is really interesting. Now, this was criticized in 1982, and it was criticized, I'm sure, again, when Benson and Berry published on about 24,000, and it's going to be criticized again when I publish, but, and that's fine. But I want to tell you, I've done everything I can to screw with those data to make it not have those 4 bumps. I've said, all right, some sites are oversampled, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to resample all the sites using thousands of iterations of a computer, so that they all, even your smallest little unit Pueblo and your largest Chaco site, are having the same number of tree ring dates. Same 4 bumps, okay? I said, okay, I'm gonna group them spatially, boom, okay, and say anything within a square kilometer, we're gonna call that a site. all sites within a square kilometer, we're just going to group them together, and do we still get the same bumps, right? We're going to aggregate. Yes, we get the same bumps. Spatially, this data set is really cool, because not only do you have discontinuity through time, you have discontinuity through space. During the BM3 and Pueblo 1 period, you get this nice fluorescence up in the northern San Juan, right? During P2 is really interesting. You get a really slow build at the start of the Pueblo 2 period. It's all down in the central San Juan Basin, you know what that is, and then it just explodes, right, at around 1100. And then in P3, we get the fluorescence again up in the northern San Juan, and then it all disappears, and we're down, people are moving down to point south and west. So we want to know what's going on with this. So we developed a second data set, and that's the one that I'm really excited about. We have a team of archaeologists and climatologists and I have developed a paleoclimate reconstruction of summer temperature and annual precipitation for the entirety of the Four Corners states at 800-meter spatial resolution. That is the spatial resolution that's necessary, the spatial and temporal resolution necessary to understand the true human impact, the village or site level impact of climate change. And what we've done is we've reconstructed, using some data from Ben Bellarado, who spoke this morning, and Larry Benson, the maize, the dry land maize farming niche through time across the entirety of the Four Corners states. And from that, we've extracted the locations of all of those tree ring dates, right? So if you've got a tree ring date at a time, you know, you got a date, 8750, I say, all right, were you in or out of the growing niche in 8750 at that place? And then we group them all together, and we put them together again in our graph. This is cool. What happens is, you get the exact same pattern through most of the entire chronology between construction and being in the maize growing niche. In BM3, you get a couple little bumps, and then it drops off. The niche drops off where people are living, the cutting dates drop off. In P2, you actually have two little bumps. It's really neat. Both of them, where the niche drops off, the cutting dates drop off. In P3, or in P2, you have the same thing, a slow build. People aren't doing well in the middle of the San Juan Basin. That's not that surprising, okay? And then where these late Chaco sites pop up, the Chaco outliers, they're in good places to grow corn. And then the P3 period is the same way. At the end, right before all of those cessations of cutting dates, you get major climate change. Things get bad there, okay? What I want to talk about is why this is so interesting. What I think is happening with this is that people are migrating. That migration is this classic Pueblo behavior. When times are good, people are aggregating on the landscape. They're conforming. They're building a lot of new construction. They're using up old deadwood resources and any wood that they might be getting from previous sites. When things get bad, they're spreading out on the landscape. They're able to gather deadwood, and so we're not going to find cutting dates like we are before. They're also living at lower densities, and this is where the Pecos classification comes into this. We're able to do the Pecos classification because of a really strong conformist bias in cultural transmission with Pueblo people. And when people are living in low densities on the landscape, you're not able to have that social interaction that maintains that conformist bias. So what we're seeing is cycles of people aggregating and being able to maintain a conformist bias, and then disaggregating on the landscape and continuing to changing actually fairly rapidly. And then you'll have a fluorescence in a different area of the landscape with a slightly different tradition in terms of ceramics, in terms of architecture. It looks sort of different. It's that discontinuity in space and in time that's driven by climate change, that allows us to walk up to a site and say, this is a P2 site, this is a P3 site. And that's it. I think that's 10 minutes. Yeah. Other questions? There must be questions. Please.
Is there any chance we could ever use Bassmaker 1?
I haven't found any chance. And honestly, the one struggle is when you get back before, VM3, oh yeah, the question was, could we ever use Basket Maker 1? So, I mean, but when you get actually before Basket Maker 3, we don't have a lot of good tree ring chronologies that would track precipitation going back that far in time. I mean, we have a handful in the entire Southwest. So our reconstructions get pretty sketchy before about AD 600 or so. Well, through tree ring chronologies. It's a bit complicated, but what we do is we've created what's called an expert model. It goes out, and like Matt Salzer is a dendroclimatologist, right? He'll go out and he'll be like, I want to reconstruct temperature in July. I know these trees at high elevations up on the San Francisco peaks are good at responding to temperature in July. I'm going to use those trees and I'm going to show, oh yeah, they're good at responding to temperature, yeah. We've developed a model that it's a computer program that goes out and for any spot on the landscape and any signal that you want, emulates what Matt Salzer would do and goes out and says what tree ring chronologies are going to be at the best at reconstructing temperature in July here. And it goes out and captures those. And what we found is that it actually is making a lot of the similar decisions that leading climatologists would make. We're just able to make it across 2,200,000 points across the landscape.